Hello, welcome to Leadapreneur Online. We're looking at Module 6, Power, of the overall learning journey of how to lead, and we're looking at Step 1, the principles of power. Leaders need power because it enables them to influence the world around them to achieve their goals and to make sure that their team can build the vision that they're working towards. If you have insufficient power, then you are unable to make the transformation of a dream into reality. And we can understand this in the context of football. A powerful player exerts a dominant control on the game that's being played. So whether you're a powerful attacker or a powerful defender, your power enables you to dominate the game and ensure that you play a major role in contributing towards your team's success. And exactly the same way, a powerful leader is able to make a dominant impact on the environment around them and enable their team or organization to be successful. So what is power? Power is the ability to exert controlling influence on a situation so that you are able to achieve the goals that you have in mind. The powerful are people who can exert a great amount of controlling influence in order to achieve great goals. And so there are three things that you need to recognize here. First, that you need a goal. Second, it's about influence. And third, it's about control. So firstly, you and your team need to be clear about what goals you need to achieve so you can start exerting control in the environment to achieve those goals. If there's nothing to achieve, then you don't need any power to achieve anything. So the first thing is have a clear goal in mind. Secondly, what kind of influence are you exerting? There are many ways of exerting influence on people. A common one is to use money to incentivize people to do the things that you want them to do. But there are a variety of other ways in which people can be influenced. They can be influenced subtly, for example, through something like the master story. Or they can be influenced directly by using hard power, such as threatening people or, using a gun, for example, to get someone to do what you want to do. There are many different ways of influencing people. And effective leaders find the right way of exerting influence to achieve the goal that they want to do, because some ways of influence are more appropriate than others for achieving your goals. And then finally, we have to be comfortable with the idea of control. Leadership is about controlling situations. There's no way around it. We need to be able to exert enough control in order to make sure that we can achieve the goals that we want to achieve. However, sometimes there's a bit of a negative connotation with control. We sometimes think that that means we have to be a control freak or, an absolute dictator. And that's not what I'm saying. What I am saying is that we have to be able to have enough influence in order to be able to get the situation to where we want it to go to achieve our goals. That's what I'm talking about. It's about recognizing that there's a threshold that we need to reach in order to be able to achieve our goals. Otherwise, we're not in control of the situation. So for example, if you're leading a sales team and you want that team to hit its targets, then you need to have enough control of the situation in order to be able to organize the team and manipulate the environment to enable the team to achieve its targets. If you can't exert that control, then you're not going to be an effective leader and the team won't achieve its targets. So in summary, power is about exerting controlling influence, but it requires a clear goal. It requires a sophisticated understanding of the ways in which you can influence the environment to achieve the goal. And it also requires that you are aware of the threshold of control that you need in order to get that goal achieved. The second thing that we want to talk about here is, how do leaders get power? Well, the way that leaders get power is they have an organization. That means that they're leading a team or they're leading a larger organization in order to achieve certain things. And the reason why leaders have power is because they are able to direct that organization. They are in the privileged position of directing the creative capability of that organization to do stuff. So leaders use their direct personal power to build an effective social organization, and then they direct that social organization to achieving great things. And there's a really simple example we can think of here. Imagine one person trying to build the pyramids of Giza. It's unlikely that they're going to be able to achieve something to the scale that they have been achieved. Now imagine directing 10,000 people to build the pyramids of Giza. And you suddenly realize that it becomes a lot more feasible to build something like the pyramids. And the key difference, obviously, there is the amount of people that you've got involved. And so that's where we can see the power of leadership. Because an effective leader, can organize those 10,000 people to work together in such a way to achieve the greater goal of building the pyramid. And that's why leaders are so powerful. Because if you bring a great number of people together and you have them focus on achieving a single task or a few tasks, then you can achieve great things. And that takes us to the final principle here, that the greater your power as a leader, the greater your ability to achieve great goals. And so it's worth recognizing that that's why we always want more power. The reason why we want more power is because we always want to achieve more things in life. We always want to pursue greater goals, achieve greater dreams, and to do that, we need to have more power. So it's important to understand that principle because that is essential for life itself. We're always searching for more power. So really, what I would like you to feel is to feel comfortable with the idea of power. It's not about shying away from it and saying, "Oh, I'm not sure that power is right for me. Maybe I'll be a different kind of leader." It doesn't work like that. Leadership is about power, but it's about finding the right way to exert the controlling influence, the right way of working with other people and leading other people to achieve goals. So the key point here is to recognize that you need power to be a real effective leader, but the way in which you go about doing that can be very different. And that's what we can see in the next slide. So here we have 4 different kinds of leaders. In the top left, we have President Barack Obama, and he's the leader of the United States in the sense that he is the elected president of the United States. But he's also the leader of the United States military. There are 2 roles. He's the president and the commander-in-chief of the United States military. And he's powerful because he gets to exert amazing amounts of influence across the institutions of the United States as the privileged position of the president. And so that's where we can see, individually on his own, he's just one man. But because of his elected position, he's able to control large organizations that themselves have large amounts of control. It's pretty clear that the US military is a very powerful entity, but at its head sits the president. And so the president is powerful because he can tell that military what to do and what not to do. And that's his real source of power. In contrast, we have Pope Benedict XVI. And what makes him powerful is his ability to influence people in sometimes a very different way that the other 3 can do. So he's the leader of the Catholics and some of the other Christians around the world. And what he is recognized is their spiritual leader. So he doesn't necessarily influence his people through money. He influences them through their spiritual beliefs. The people will listen to the Pope because they recognize him as their spiritual leader, and they'll do what he says. And that's why he's powerful, because many people will listen to him because of his position and because he's head of the Catholic Church. In the third situation, we have Margaret Chan, who's Director General of the World Health Organization. Now, I would expect that most people probably haven't heard of Margaret Chan, but they might have heard about the World Health Organization. And this ties into another concept, because the first 2 leaders are sort of celebrities in their own right. They're quite well known, whereas Margaret Chan isn't. But that doesn't make her any less of an effective leader. So the reason why I use her as an example is that I think it's important to recognize that we shouldn't confuse celebrity with leadership. Leadership is about leading an organization. It's not just about being well known. And some leaders exert their influence by being more subtle and being more discreet. And so she's an example of someone who leads a great and important organization, and yet is not necessarily well known in the everyday world that we live in. Finally, we have Bill Gates, who's again different to the other 3, because he's a self-made man, so to say, whose power initially rests on the large amounts of money that he's been able to amass for himself. By building up Microsoft into being one of the largest organizations in the world, he has become one of the richest men in the world. And what's important to recognize about him is that his power rests on different sources. It rests primarily, on his personal wealth, but it also rests on his position as chairman of Microsoft. And so here we can see 2 contrasts, because there are multiple platforms of power that leaders can access in order to influence the environment around them. Bill Gates, for example, could use the Microsoft Corporation to exert influence in a way that he thinks is important, but he can also use his personal wealth to influence things to achieve the goals that he wants to work towards. And a great example of that is that he has worked with his wife to create the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation that works for a number of great causes, for example, looking to reduce the problems of malaria around the world. And so he's putting in his personal wealth and using that in a way to achieve the outcome of reducing malaria in the world. And so that's exactly where we can see that technical definition of power. If power is the ability to exert controlling influence, then Bill Gates has power over malaria, because what he's doing is influencing doctors, influencing health systems, influencing medicine manufacturers, using his wealth and using his personal connections to coordinate them in such a way to work towards the goal of eliminating malaria. And so that's a great example of using power in a positive way. So what unites all 4 of those examples is that they're the leaders of powerful organizations. And that leads us nicely to this quote by Scott Keller and Colin Price, because they tell us that the greatest invention of all time, in their opinion, and I think it's also a worthy contender, is the organization, the capability of people to work together towards a common goal. It's been instrumental in the success of the human species, whether that's organizing ourselves into a hunting group to hunt a larger mammal, or organize ourselves into a society to live prosperously. In every step of humanity's journey, organizations have played a crucial role in enabling us to be successful. And the reason for that is because they leverage that greater creative capability. In other words, by working as an organization, we're able to achieve things that no man or woman could ever achieve on their own. And that's why they're so powerful, and that's why they're so important. And because they're so powerful and important, that's why our leaders are so important, because they're responsible for building effective organizations and directing that creative capability. And that takes us to the second quote from Abraham Lincoln, in which he talks about the challenge of giving people power. Because as I just said, leaders are responsible for directing that great creative capability of the organization. The way that I imagine it is sort of that you have this fire hose of creativity, and you can choose where you direct that fire hose. And you can either choose to direct it, so to say, to put out the fires and build a better world, or you can choose it to direct in such a way that you end up drowning everybody. And so what you're really obviously trying to do is put out the fires and water the plants and use that creativity for good. And the way that you can test people, as Abraham Lincoln correctly points out, is to give someone power. Because power is something that's very different to simply being clever. Just because you're clever doesn't mean you deserve to have power. Because how will you use that power? Will you use it wisely? Will you use it compassionately? And that's why he reckons that it's important to test someone's character in order before you give them power. Because there are too many examples in history of people becoming into power and using it for terrible actions rather than for good. So the last quote here is by Nietzsche, and he touches onto something that most people are not willing to talk about when we talk about power. We easily disguise our conversations around leadership and power with nice, fluffy, positive language. We're going to build a better world. Let's use purpose and authenticity, and we're going to use our values to guide us, and strategy, and all these kind of concepts. But in the end, it is about power, because it's always going to be about control. Who can exert the controlling influence to achieve their goals? Because it's important to recognize that in the world today, there are many competing influences. Everyone wants to achieve their goals, and they want to achieve their goals ahead of you. And so the person who wins, in other words, the person whose goals get achieved, are the ones who are more powerful than the others. Now, I don't want to get too carried away with describing, a world that's sort of red in tooth and claw. I'm not saying that we live in a hyper-competitive world in the sense of saying that we have to be cruel to one another. But we have to be practical and realistic. And when we are leading our teams and when we're leading our organizations, we have to recognize that if we don't have enough power, then we cannot succeed. It is as simple as that. And so we need to find a way to give ourselves power. Because the simple reality is that no one's going to give you power. No one is going to willingly see someone else have more power than them. And so no one will ever grant you power. Instead, you have to do what Nietzsche says. You have to grant yourself power by having the will to power. Now, what does he mean by the will to power? What he's talking about is it's a particular kind of attitude, a way of looking at the world. The will to power is to look at the world and say, I want to exert control over the world to achieve my goals. It's as simple as that. And though that sounds, in a way, dangerously egotistical and maniacal, we also have to be practical about this, because there is a middle ground there. You can get obsessed with power, as some people do, and that's when you become, a raving tyrant. But there is also a world in which people have enough power to ensure their goals are achieved, and then most importantly, to protect their goals and to protect their organizations. And the way that they do that fundamentally is by having the will to power. And that means that they have the right attitude in terms of wanting to exert control and wanting to grow their power base to be successful. So a simple way to test yourself on this, and you can do this right now, is to pause a presentation and go and look at a mirror and look at yourself in the mirror and simply say to yourself, I want to control. I want to be in charge of the organization. I want to be in charge of our environment, and I want to have the control that I need to achieve the goals. And if you can't say that with a straight face, if you can't say that and take yourself seriously, then you're not going to be an effective leader. And the reason for that is that in the end, you need to have that hardness to you, that willingness to desire power and to use power to achieve your goals. And the reason I tell you this is because I think it's important for us to keep it real, to actually talk about what leadership really is, rather than just sugarcoating it all the time. And if you're not someone who's prepared to engage with the will to power, then you never will find the levels of power that you need to actually get your goals done. A great example of the will to power is the Roman Empire. Starting as a small village on the banks of the river Tiber in central Italy, they grew their culture and civilization to create one of the largest empires in history, stretching from Portugal on the shores of the Atlantic in the west to Iraq in the east, from Scotland in the north to Egypt in the south. Their large empire is a tribute to their will to power, because we have to understand, how did this empire get built? How did this empire maintain itself for centuries? And at the essence of Rome lies the will to power. The will to go out there and to seek to control the environment, to control the peoples around them, and to say, we will build our empire. And though I understand that this is something that can come across as a bit too power hungry, we also need to look at the practical side of leadership. How will you achieve your great goals? I'm sure that you're sitting there right now with a great dream of what it is that you want to achieve. And my question to you is, okay, how are you actually going to do that? It's a serious question. Pause the presentation and think about it. How are you going to achieve those great goals? How are you going to become that great leader that I'm sure you aspire to become? The only way that you'll be able to do that is by becoming an individual who can use power. And more importantly, to become great, you do need great amounts of power. And so that's why it's important that you are clear in your mind, that you can have an honest conversation with yourself about how much power you need and how you're going to get that power and how you're going to use that power in order to achieve your goals. And that takes us to what leadership is about in terms of power. Because the leader's source of power is their organization. And what they are using their power to do as individuals is to maintain that organization and therefore maintain their power base. And there are three basic levels of organizational viability that we need to consider. Level 1 is existence. Might sound obvious, but the first step is that as a leader, you need to make sure that your organization exists. So the next step is to ensure that that organization then survives. The difference is that at the survival level, you're looking to adapt to change. The basic functions are in place to secure the existence of the organization. How can you make sure that your organization adapts to changes and still continues to be successful? Then the third level, the highest level, is thriving. How do you empower your organization to reach high performance, to maximize its creative capability, and thereby achieve its goals and build its vision in the most successful way possible? Your job as a leader, your personal challenge, is to use your individual power to influence your team and organization in such a way that it's hitting these three levels of viability. You need to make sure that your organization exists. You need to make sure that your organization is surviving by adapting to the changing environment. And you need to use your power to ensure that the organization reaches a state of high performance, that it is maximizing its creative capability and therefore achieving great goals and building a great dream. How do you do this then? What is the way in which you do this? Well, we need to remind ourselves of three things. First, your power flows from your organization. And the way that you do that is by connecting, coordinating, and controlling the elements that we've talked about over this learning journey. In other words, you build an organization by combining the ideas of purpose, people, plans, performance, and plot. That's how you build an organization. And by doing those things, by connecting, coordinating, and controlling those 6 elements, you are able to build an effective organization. The reason why you want to do that is that the organization becomes a force multiplier. Let's imagine that you have one goal. Well, then it's only you working towards that. If you can organize 10,000 people by using purpose, people, plans, performance, and plot, then now you can make sure that 10,000 people are all directing their creative capability to achieve your goal. And by having that incredible creative power behind you, you're able to achieve great things. So let's look at the individual details of the elements that we've been covering. So first, purpose. Purpose is important because it provides a reason for people coming together in the first place. If there's no sense of purpose, there's no sense for us for being together. I've got other things to do. And so you need to provide the most attractive, powerful sense of purpose in order to bring people to the table and be willing to work with you. Secondly, you then need to make sure you have the best people, because they're your source of creative capability. The better the people and the more people you have, the greater your creative capability as an organization. The third stage is planning. There's no point in having a powerful purpose and great people if they're poorly organized. So it's important to create effective strategies and organize your people in a way that maximizes their capabilities. Level 4, performance. Once we've got a great plan, we need to actually translate that into results. And so a great leader is focused on transforming good ideas into results by looking at the idea of performance. How can we make sure that our people are being as successful as possible? What metrics do you have in place to make sure that you're measuring success? So on and so forth. And then finally, plot. Plot is the magic sauce, the invisible glue that binds everything together through time. If you imagine people coming together for a purpose and then being organized and doing the job, how do you make sure that 6 months later they're all working together effectively? How do you make sure that 2 or 3 years later they're still just as engaged and just as excited and just as motivated to keep giving their best every day? That's where plot comes in. Plot provides the clarity, unity, and meaning for an organization to drive itself through time and achieve high performance. And then finally, power. Your power comes from the organization. And the power module in this learning journey is emphasized in the concept that you need to organize the other 5 elements in order to create an effective organization. So your source of power depends on how effectively you organize purpose, people, planning, performance, and plot. So 2 great examples of leaders using their power for good are William Wilberforce and Lord Sebastian Coe. William Wilberforce was the leader of the movement to abolish the slave trade. And in 1807, after tireless campaigning by him and his many compatriots, the British Parliament passed the Slave Trade Act in 1807, which banned the slave trade throughout the British Empire. However, the problem was that slavery itself was still allowed. So what was banned was the buying and selling of slaves, but not the act of slavery itself. So William Wilberforce and his team had to campaign even further, and that eventually led to the 1833 Slavery Abolition Act, which banned all slavery in all forms across the British Empire. This was a man who campaigned for something that he believed was good, and he used his power to exert influence on the world around him to be able to achieve his goal of eliminating slavery in the world. A contemporary example of a leader who's used his power for good is Lord Sebastian Coe. He's the man who basically made the Olympics in London 2012 happen. And he's credited with having the vision and the courage and the leadership skills that were needed to bring this great sporting event to London. And as someone who had the great fortune to be in London during 2012 Olympics, I can tell you he did a fantastic job. But the overall point that I want to make here is that to bring the Olympics anywhere requires a great amount of power. If you think about it, think how much influence he had to exert in order to make sure that the Olympics not only came to London, but were effective and were well delivered. And so that's a great example of recognizing that these people were unafraid of using power to make the world a better place. And exactly the same way, I can only urge you to find a way to give yourself as much power as possible, grant yourself the will to power, and grow it so that you can use your influence to build the better world that we all dream of. So let's finish with some practical points. Your source of power is your organization. So the better your organization, the greater your levels of power will be, and the greater the goals and the good that you can contribute to the world. To do this, you need to focus on the quality and quantity of each P, as the greater the quality and quantity of these Ps, the more powerful your organization can become. For example, let's imagine that you look at your sense of purpose. The greater the quality your sense of purpose has, the more inspiring and motivating it is, the more you'll enable your people to be engaged with the organization and to give more to the organization. And because you have people working harder and giving more, you have greater capability. In other words, you have greater power. So it's important to make sure that you're maintaining the quality and quantity of your Ps, and in fact, ideally, you should be growing them. Second of all, recognize that it's not simply about bringing the Ps together. It's not about sort of putting purpose in one corner, people in another, the planning in another, so on and so forth. It only works when they're effectively coordinated. They need to be, intelligently synthesized. And that's your task, to effectively coordinate and control the Ps in such a way that a powerful organization is actually created. So the point about about point 2, is that it's not just having a quality and quantity of Ps. You actually need to connect them together effectively. And that's why your priority should be coordinating and controlling the organization. And the third, and perhaps the most useful concept that you can take away from all of this, is that you've got to use it or you'll lose it. If you don't use power, you will lose power because someone else will take it away from you. So you never be afraid of the will to power, and never be afraid to grow your power base and use it in a positive manner to achieve your goals and to build a successful, prosperous organization that contributes towards building a better world. So in summary, power is the ability to exert controlling influence. You need power to achieve your goals. The more power you have, the greater the goals that you can achieve. You give yourself power by choosing to build a powerful organization, and that's done by coordinating the 7 Ps. The reason it's 7 Ps and not 6 Ps is that I believe that the most powerful of those elements is to have passionate people. So the 7th people represents passion and passionate people. And the reason why I've done this is because if you have passionate people, then you've already overcome the greatest challenge. Because once your people are willing and motivated and engaged, then you can always find a way to make sure that they have great plans and great performance and great plot. But without passionate people, it's very difficult to go out there and achieve great things. So finally, you should be looking to grow your organization through power. Use your power to take the organization from the stages of exist to survive, then ultimately to become a thriving organization that you can be proud of, that's delivering great results, and above all, is really building a better world.